Welcome back. I need to retape my stick. So, yeah, I need to retape my stick. Anyway, I want to talk today about something that we've discussed before on the channel. I want to come about it from a different angle. I don't want to do the same thing we've already discussed in previous videos, where I've talked about Department of Player Safety and what they might be getting right or getting wrong and all that fun stuff, because we know we're not going to agree. And we see that with every incident. Every single incident, there is, I think that's a suspension. I don't think that's a suspension. This is a dirty hit. This guy should have kept his head up. This is a boarding call. Nope, he turned his back at the last second. So we get into these arguments, and then of course there's the arguments too of, hey, this guy got hurt, so, and that argument's out there too. So I want to discuss this from a bit of a different point of view today, right? So the most penalty minutes ever recorded in one game by one player was Randy Holt for the LA Kings against the Philadelphia Flyers. I believe it was 1979. Should have written down the year. 9 penalties in that game for 67 minutes. Yeah. The leader right now in penalty minutes in the entire National Hockey League for the season is Mark Borowiecki with 114 penalty minutes in 44 games. The game has completely changed. What I've noticed when it comes to how the game has changed is that the expectations have changed from fans as well. A play that we might have looked at back in the 80s and said, they'll get him back next time, has now become, that guy needs to be suspended immediately, and it needs to be a nice long suspension. It's completely different. Now, your career penalty minutes leader in NHL history is Tiger Williams, thus the Canucks cap. 3,971 penalty minutes in only 962 games. And I say only because the active leader in penalty minutes is Zdeno Chara with 2,077 penalty minutes in 1,664 games. So penalty minutes per game, a little different between Tiger Williams and Zdeno Chara. Nobody will ever approach Williams' record. People talk a lot about the records that Gretzky set for points. We don't pay enough attention to the fact that penalty minutes have dropped like a rock in the National Hockey League. And I think what this does is that hockey is a game that, and I put these three in this order for a reason, it's a fast game. The first thing that people notice when they're at ice level is how fast it is. It is a skilled game. People notice how fast these decisions are made, how crisp the passes are, tape to tape. And it is more fun to watch now, I think, than ever when it comes to the skill side. And it's violent. Now, back in the 80s, I might have put it as skilled, violent, and fast. Fast might have been third on the list, because it was still fast. It wasn't as fast. And the violence was definitely far more pronounced. You could have a bench-clearing brawl until Montreal and Quebec went a little bit too far with it, and the NHL realized we get a black eye from these. A lot of it ends up being PR. I still think when they banned the bench clearing brawl, I think that was a PR move as much as it was anything else. Because I don't think the NHL cared that much about the bench clearing brawl when they were getting, good reports on it. Oh, look, Mike Milbury smacked somebody with his shoe. That's funny. And so things that were taking place in hockey in the 70s and 80s, especially late 70s before I was watching, honestly, it was a completely different environment for hockey back then. But it's a violent game. So when you're playing any version of hockey, and it doesn't matter if it's ice hockey, floor hockey, or roller hockey, or street hockey, whatever it is, floor hockey. I think I already said floor. Anyway, it is violent. So whether you're running, you're skating, you're blading, whatever you're doing, you got this stick, and you're going to be competitive. And the more competitive you are, the more likely you are for this to end up becoming a weapon. And I remember when I was playing in middle school, and I was in a floor hockey group in middle school. I know, ladies, I'm married, I'm taken, sorry. But yeah, I was in a floor hockey group in middle school, and we would get guys come out who played the hockey locally. They were in a bantam league, maybe they were in working their way up through juniors, and they shot the ball really, really hard, harder than we did, because we understood it was a casual game between friends. It was kind of fun. We weren't as competitive, and things would get kind of chippy and kind of physical, and so we'd have to alter our game. But when it was just us, we would just have a nice, fun, casual game. I'd come out, sure, my shins might get bloodied up. I might have, finger bleeding here and there from a slash, whatever, but it wasn't that bad. But the higher up you go, the more competitive things get. And once you get to the NHL, you're looking at extreme speed. So even a casual hit, if you're going as fast as NHLers are going, those still hurt, and you're still looking at a situation where guys get hurt. And that's part of the argument too when it comes to what Department of Player Safety needs to do and all that other fun stuff. So you're looking at a situation right now where the NHL is trying to balance the fast, the skilled, and the violence. The violence is part of the game. You look at any highlight package, and you're going to have violent hits in those highlight packages that the NHL either puts together themselves or they rubber stamp those commercials to go out for everybody. There was a whole series on the Rock'em Sock'em, and of course, a lot of that was punching and hitting, and some of those hits were over the line, but they were still violent, and so they'd end up in the video. And it's changed. Now we look at penalty minutes per game by team. Right now, Nashville's getting the most penalty minutes, an average of 12 minutes and 24 seconds per game, which is very, very little compared to what they were putting up in the 80s. But then you look at Pittsburgh, who's taking the least amount of penalties per game, 6 minutes and 45 seconds in the box on average. So one fight and one minor would blow up that number already. And so, and it's possible too for a guy to get 5 for fighting and 2 for boarding, or 5 for fighting and 2 for elbowing. So the fact that Pittsburgh's penalty numbers are so low, I think it's part of the reason why some of these incidents end up really standing out. The game has changed. So the more physical side of it gets, I think, more attention now than what it used to. And we have a whole generation coming up now who don't remember how the game was played. But the guys at Department of Player Safety, the guys making the decisions, do remember when the game was played a certain way, when the game was a little rougher, when the game was violent, and more violent than it is now. So some of these violent hits, and I'll go through this, but some of these violent hits that may offend people, may make people upset, I don't think it upsets them nearly as much. Major penalties. Nashville has 47 on the season. That is the highest number in the league. Toronto has the lowest number of majors in the league at 6. So that's the difference right there. And again, I know Nashville fans are quite happy with the way things are going in general. I do wonder come playoff time if they're going to have to, cut back on some of the physical side of the game, because it does put them in the box more often than other teams. But we'll see. Now, what's interesting, too, is that if you look through hockey's history, and I've got all kinds of historical books on hockey, and during the summer, I always do historical videos, which nobody watches, but I do them anyways because it's fun to look through hockey history and talk about it. Now, the violent beginnings for hockey involved manslaughter, actual players being charged with manslaughter because players would die. And this is where hockey is violent, and it is the beginning and the roots of the game that we have now. Obviously, that got cut out because there was talk of banning the sport. This was a game that people said, you know what, this is as violent as cockfighting. I don't know that I can watch this. And so we've only had one NHL player ever banned. That was Billy Coutu. He was banned from the NHL in 1927, assaulting referees and starting a bench-clearing brawl with the Ottawa Senators during a game between Boston and Ottawa, where, again, Billy, being a Boston Bruin, and I get it, and the Bruins thing, Eddie Shore was shortly after that too. The Boston Bruins have a long history of having at least a player in their lineup who is a lightning rod for controversy, and right now that'd be Brad Marchand. So, who I got a jersey of at one point, because I thought this would be funny to wear in a video, and I've never worn it in a video because, nope. So, anyways, so Billy ends up getting banned for life, and it was because he assaulted referees, and the NHL said we can't have this. And that's 1927. When I hear people talking about banning players, the most recent one that I think the calls were really high for were for Todd Bertuzzi, who in 2004 was also the most recent player to be charged by the police for what happened with Steve Moore on the ice at a game. And Bertuzzi, there was a civil lawsuit as well that ends up getting settled, and it was ugly. And he gets suspended for over a year, but here's the but part of this. The 2004-2005 seasons wiped out due to a dispute. So the actual number of games he misses is not over 100. It ends up being, I think it was what, 24, 27 games or something. So because of the timing of the suspension and when he gets reinstated, it makes it look like he didn't suffer any ramifications, even though he did. The repercussions he had there were major. During that lockout, there were players that were having little tours and stuff of that nature, and he was not allowed. He wasn't going along with any of this. And Bertuzzi was still considered to be a pretty good skilled player in the league at the time. And I don't think that his career ever fully recovered. And again, if you're of the mind that he should have been banned from the game for life, there's nothing I can say to change your mind on that. If you were of the mind that Marchand should just be thrown out of the league, nothing I can say with that either. I can say, though, that watching as much hockey as I do, most of the players that make people angry, it's rare, and I understand people are going to say it's not that rare, but it is rare that they really and fully cross that line and end up in a situation where Department of Player Safety has to do something. So all of that in mind, and with that setup of current and the past and where the past was, and again, remembering that the people who are making the decisions, even the commissioner himself, when does he take over the league? Quite a while ago. So the league that they came into is not the league that they're running now. So it is possible that once we get into a new generation of hockey players or former hockey players making these decisions, we see a sliding scale in terms of what is a suspension and what isn't. So we'll go through these. So roughing. Roughing's also, that can be a sucker punch. That can be just, usually it's a sucker punch. Roughing in general doesn't rise to the level of a suspension in most cases. Now, I don't like sucker punches for the fact that, you're punching somebody from behind. I think it's cowardly. But I mean, you see it, and again, it's a violent game. You get upset, and in the spur of the moment, and a lot of this is spur of the moment, which I think also makes a difference to how Department of Player Safety sees things, which is there premeditated intent? So let's say that somebody does something stupid to me in the first period, and I stew on it. In the second, I'm hunting him on the ice, and then I end up with the sucker punch. I think that's a worse suspension, even if it's the exact same punch, as if it's a spur of the moment thing and I get up and turn around and drill a guy. So even if it's the same punch and it has the same injury, I think they treat it differently. And that's where the argument can come in of, should they? Should it make a difference if it's heat of the moment or if it's premeditated? Right? So I get that. And this video is more of me just saying, this is how I see it. These are the fouls that we discuss a lot. And I'd like to see feedback from people on what they think should happen. Kneeing. Kneeing is brutal. And I remember knee-on-knee hits. I remember them being very prominent in the league about 3 decades ago, and how brutal they could be. And I remember Ulf Samuelson's one that stands out to me with some of the questionable borderline stuff. And again, a lot of these veteran players will know where the line is, and they'll know what crosses it, and they sort of seem to skirt that line just enough where it's like, okay, I'm going to hit this guy. He could get hurt. I might get in trouble later, but I'm going to throw the hit. Now, and again, it is a fast game, so do they really think about it that far in advance? Is there that much thought put into it, or is it more of a, I'm sticking my leg out because I'm going to miss my check here? And there are times where we see that, where a defenseman will be like, I totally blew this. This guy's going to go right by me. And you stick your leg out, not thinking I'm going to end up, potentially hurting him or myself. Because if your knee's not locked properly, you could get hurt as well. It's not just the guy throwing the knee that gets hurt. It's not just the guy taking the knee that gets hurt. The guy who throws the knee can get hurt as well. Slashing is honestly one of those that I think it depends on the severity of it. And again, back in the day, slashing happened all the time. Right now, of course, if it's a slash on the hands, it's an automatic penalty because of Mark Mathot. So, because that's when the penalty changed. Mathot fingertip gets hacked off, and there wasn't even a penalty on the play because that wasn't considered to be a penalty at the time. The NHL, realizing how that made them look, they went and changed the rule. So that's the sad part, is that it takes something bad happening before the NHL makes a change. So sometimes the NHL's not proactive. It's more reactive than proactive, and I think that leads to some damage of their public persona / image as well, is that they're not getting out ahead of these things, right? High sticking. High sticking is one of those odd ones too, where if it's a wild swing of the stick, and again it can be just one of those things where somebody ticks you off and you just turn around and swing your stick. It can happen, and again, player safety probably looks at it and goes, "Well, that was stupid," but I don't know. Are we going to suspend him for that? I mean, the guy, he didn't connect, he didn't hurt the guy. So we could watch the game and go, wow, that was a wild stick swing. That should be a suspension. And Department of Player Safety go, well, he didn't connect. So no harm, no foul. Actual literal meaning right there of no harm, no foul, I guess. Charging's one that's interesting because what we define as a charge, what we qualify as a charge can be different based on who's watching. Things get very tribal when it comes to these penalties, when it comes to suspensions. There are definitely fans of teams that no matter what their players do, they will not see fault. There are definitely fans who will find fault in the other team, whatever they do against their team, no matter what it is. I'm not in that category. There have been times where I've been at a Canucks game and everybody's booing, and I'll say out loud, "It's not that's not a penalty." I don't know why they're trying to call penalty. I don't know why the fans are upset. That was not a penalty. And I just straight out loud. Vice versa too, where a penalty gets called, and I'm like, wow, that was weak. And meanwhile, the fans are like, yay, we're getting a power play. And I'm like, that was a weak call. I'm surprised they called that. So high sticking to me is one of those things, and I've mentioned this before. I think the fact that 4 minutes is decided by whether or not a guy's mouth is bleeding is odd because, and I've said this before, you can get badly injured and not be bleeding at the same time. That's how head hits work, which is right underneath high sticking. We'll come to head hits. Charging, as I said, it really depends on how you view it. And charging to me seems to be almost more tribal than the other ones because you're like, yeah, that was a really good hit. Yeah, but he took a lot of steps into that hit. No, he didn't. He was just gliding. Okay, he took a lot of steps, so there's that, right? And I know people are going to think, oh, he's talking about Scheifele. No, there's other times that happens too. The Scheifele one was obvious. It was there. There's other times that happens too. Cross-checking, they talked about, really clamping down on cross-checking. What's interesting to me with cross-checking is, and I've got it next to boarding for a simple reason. So when they started calling cross-checking, it felt like they let up on the boarding calls. And it kind of feels like lately they've been letting up a bit on the cross-checking penalties, but they're still not calling the boarding as much as they were. I feel bad for referees in this position because, again, it is a very fast, very skilled game, and they're there to keep an eye on the violence, right? They're there to make sure the violence doesn't get out of control. They're there to manage the game, which is a terminology that people really don't like as well. Where it's like, don't manage the game, just call the game. And I've said call the rule book. I believe that. But is it easy for me to say that as not an NHL ref? Yeah, it's much easier for me. So, boarding and cross-checking are right next to each other for that reason. Where I could two-hand somebody into the boards. Should that be a cross-check? Should it be a board? Or should it be both? Should the NHL come out and say, you know what, you cross-check somebody head first into the boards, we're going to give you both penalties. And I don't know if that makes a difference because, again, a lot of these penalties are heat of the moment. So is it going to matter to a player in the heat of the moment when they're not thinking rationally? They're just thinking, wow, that guy just totally slashed me in the back of the leg. You get up and cross-check him. He hits the boards. Now you're in the box for 4. Would that matter? Would you get up thinking that guy just slashed me? But if I hit him, I'm going to get a 4-minute instead of a 2. I don't know that you will. And head hits. Head hits are odd to me that, again, you can get a 2-minute penalty for a hit to the head. The referees look and go, yep, that's a hit to the head. And they put you in the box for 2 minutes. And then Department of Player Safety comes out the next day and goes, and that's 3 games. So, but it wasn't a game misconduct at the time. So that's one of those things that I think are odd. I think that with head hits, it might be beneficial to immediately have Toronto on the phone for those. If it's an illegal hit to the head, and if Toronto is on the phone and it's still a 2-minute penalty, I don't even know what we're doing here. I don't know that I understand how anything works if that is in fact the case. I don't think it is though. I think they just review the play and they say, all right, that's a head hit. Yep, you're in the box. And yeah, again, the 2-minute penalty can become a suspension, and sometimes a guy gets 5 in a game for something and no suspension after because Department of Player Safety will say, well, we feel like that the game misconduct that he got was enough. That was enough of a punishment. which is, again, to me, I understand why people might think that's a good thing and why others would say, well, wait a minute, no. So, again, I understand. Slew Foot, which, again, is a dirty play. If a guy is completely unaware and you put your leg out and you pull him back and you knock him to the ice, that's a very dangerous play. That can lead to a concussion. It can lead to a back injury. You could hurt a guy in a lot of ways. And, of course, since you're targeting the legs on that too, you could hurt his ankle. You could hurt his knee. He could twist his foot on the way down. Slew Foot is dangerous. They usually label it as tripping, which throws fans off because they're like, it wasn't a trip, it was a slew foot. Technically, a slew foot is a trip, but not every... Okay, every slew foot is a trip. Not every trip is a slew foot. I would think that's the best way to describe it. I'm trying to think if there's a way to deliver a slew foot that the guy doesn't actually fall down and it's not a trip. I don't think there is. But it's a dangerous play, and much like kneeing, I don't like to see it at all. Some of the stuff that gets called and doesn't get called baffles me too. But the slew foot and the kneeing, that's something that I think they have to make sure doesn't become a more prominent part of the game. And so, yes, there are times where they hand out fines. Maybe don't hand out the fines. Maybe next time around with the CBA, they say, you know what, it's either a suspension or it's nothing because the fines don't matter. Maybe have a scale where you go, okay, you know, this guy's got one infraction of this type. He's got two infractions of this type. Now we have to take a look and see if it's a suspension. But throw away the fine stuff right away. The thing is, of course, fans would want to see that list. You know, we hear who's been diving, and we see the fines for diving. So I would think that fans would want to know, you know, who's been accused of slew footing, who's actually doing so. Interference is an odd one. Interference is such a bewildering call to me, as I think it's the most inconsistently called penalty in the National Hockey League. And there are times where interference is a suspension. Guy's completely unassuming, and you come through and drill him. And this is where, too, fans will say, well, yeah, that's an interference penalty. It shouldn't have been a suspension. You got to keep your head up. It's his own fault. He wasn't paying attention to the fact that there was some guy coming at him from the side, even though the puck's right in front of him, and he has no reason to think that there's a guy who's going to drill him from beside him because he doesn't have the puck. But that's not the problem. So there is that. There's that very vocal part of hockey fandom that will say that it is always on the guy getting hit. Now, the one thing I will say is, as a shorter male, I agree with the idea that shorter hockey players need to be aware of the taller hockey players. Because there have been times where I've been playing, I get an elbow, and it's on me. Because, you know, I get elbowed in the face, and it's on me because I didn't, you know, pay attention to the fact that this guy was coming over, and so it's on me. And so he makes a play that if a guy was equal height to him, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But since I'm shorter, I might get an elbow in the nose kind of thing. So there is something to that. The height difference should be taken into consideration. It is, I think, part of the reason why Zdeno Chara has avoided having to deal with Department of Player Safety at times. And I know that upsets people too. I know there are people who will not agree with that. What was that? I didn't see what you were doing. Anyways, but that being said, interference is one of those that I really am surprised. It's one, like, when I'm watching hockey games now, the things I say out loud most often are, this play's offside, so if somebody scores, the goal's not going to count. And then the puck comes out, and I'm like, that doesn't matter. Why is that not interference? Is probably the second most often thing I say when I'm watching hockey games. And it doesn't matter who delivers it. It doesn't matter who takes it. I don't get tribal with the whole thing. The closest I might get with that is if it's the Canucks, the Bruins, or the Stars that are guilty of it, I might say they're lucky they didn't get called there. They're lucky that wasn't called as interference because the puck's nowhere near there. The one that I laugh about too is when announcers, and it's usually your regional announcers, will be like, I don't know why they called the penalty there. That's a good hit. And I'll say out loud to the TV, yeah, it is a good hit. The puck's nowhere near either player. It is nowhere near either player, so it's interference. You can't do that. And it is something that, again, if you watch the game back in the 80s, not a big deal. You take the hit. But now I think it's more consistently called interference. And then I had to have biting up here because there was a biting suspension this year, right? I don't know. How much damage do you do with biting? I guess it would depend on the bite and all that. It is odd. And again, you probably draw blood there. So 4 or 5 in a game. And then, of course, your suspensions and whatnot. But again, that comes back to the fact that it's violent. Guys get ticked. Guys genuinely hate each other out there. There's John Tortorella a few years ago that said he was tired of it being like a fun league and everybody gets along and he wanted to see anger and hatred back. If you're in the camp that you want to see the anger and hatred back, then you're going to get these incidents more often. You're going to get guys that in the heat of the moment really don't like each other and probably do something really unsafe. So where does Department of Player Safety come in? I think where Department of Player Safety has a problem, and I've talked about this before, this is why I wanted to do this differently than I've done other videos like this. The problem with Department of Player Safety is that they'll make decisions and there doesn't seem to be a logical progression in this. There doesn't seem to be it and I understand every incident is different, but you should have some sort of a logical decision making that makes sense to fans and I think to the players too, because we see former players complaining, current players complaining, and a lot of whataboutism, which I really try hard to stay away from, because there's no good finish to whataboutism. Because let's say that I'm a Sabres fan and Rasmus Dahlin does one thing, and then they're against Vegas and Jack Eichel does something as well. I might get mad that Eichel did something and then say, well, yeah, but what Dahlin did was different. So there's that, right? Where and I know the Dahlin Matthews thing happened recently. I want to use one of the different players because sure, but there does, I think, need to be. I'm not going to say a handbook for fans to understand what gets called and why, but as we get finished with each year, I don't think it would hurt if Department of Player Safety was a little more transparent at the start of the year. And I'm not saying that we have to have the inner workings of the NHL, because I think that's just not going to help, because then we're going to bash them over what they're not calling that they're supposed to and whatnot. But there does seem to be a randomness to it, where you look at an incident and go, that might be a fine, that might be a suspension. I used to talk about it a lot more. I used to actually, I would do a video during a game where I would talk about an incident that took place, and I'd say, man, this should be a suspension, and then nothing would happen. That hit would be completely ignored by Department of Player Safety, and then there might be something else that happens that I look at and I go, that's not too bad. And then Department of Player Safety gives a guy 2 or 3 games. So I'm not saying this from a perspective of somebody who doesn't question the decisions made, but I understand that the game is fast, makes it hard for referees. It is not an easy job. And I always say, if you're at ice level and you watch a hockey game, you understand how fast it is. They don't have the replays. I am sure that referees will call a penalty or not call a penalty, and then they look up at the replay and they're like, I missed that. Or, whoops, that I gave it to that guy and it shouldn't have been. Now, should those be reviewable? Yes. I think they should be. And I think referees should be allowed to blow the whistle, review the play, and then call a penalty. Where something takes place and they go, okay, you slashed him. So let's say at the Tom Wilson thing. Tom Wilson takes a slash from Artemi Panarin. And you look at it and you go, Panarin was pretty ticked there. And Panarin's like, yeah, he threw a vicious slash at me first. Referee's like, all right, I didn't see that. Which is fine. Referees are human. Allow them to say it. And then allow them to, after, the whistle's gone, obviously, go over and review the play. And go, yeah, so Wilson, you're getting 2, and Panarin, you're also getting 2, 4-on-4. We've seen that where referees will call 1 penalty just because they're allowed to review it, the 5-minute major. Double minors, high-sticking and whatnot, because they want to take a look. We've seen that a couple of times lately. Maybe that would make... And I don't think that would make fans happy. I don't think there's a way to make fans happy with officiating in sports. But at least then you'd see, I think, more consistency and then more transparency too after, right? Because we'd like to see that kind of level of transparency, and maybe that would lead to players being a little happier about things. Because again, as long as guys are running around with these sticks, now this one's wood, it's not a composite, but yeah, the composites still hurt. As long as guys are basically skating around with weapons, and you got 10 of them out there at a time, 12 including the goalies, things happen, and they happen really fast. And I think giving the referees the best tools to have that call made correctly the first time would make a lot of sense. and then having some level of transparency. I don't expect full from Department of Player Safety would help as well, because it does feel like we get a lot of calls that are middling, where it's, well, wait, why was that, or we saw with Subban this year, just more and more fines and not a suspension. And so that gives both him a reputation, it gives the league a reputation, and it gets kind of ugly from there. But that being said, I think I covered all the penalties that are out there. I think I covered all the potential incidents that are out there. We haven't had a bench clearing brawl in a very long time. Those were very dangerous, and you could suspend multiple players during any bench clearing brawl. Just look it up on YouTube, bench clearing brawl, and then just get a notebook and count how many guys by today's standards would get suspended for things they did during brawls that could last. Like, it felt like 20, 30 minutes sometimes the brawls could go on. So, it's a brawl. They're brutal. Blood all over the ice. So I'm glad that's not the game that we're watching now. I'm glad that doesn't happen anymore. But there's still incidents. And again, because the game isn't as violent as it was before, I think we sometimes see people overreacting. But again, I'm an old man. I'm an old man that remembers watching games in the 80s and 90s. So I will see a play during a game and I go, that's pretty rough. But, penalty. And then I'll see the comments online. That should be a suspension. That should be like 5 games. That's really dangerous. That he hurt that guy. He should be out until that guy gets back. And it's definitely it's the difference between I want to say there is that generational difference. And then of course you're going to have the opinion as well of it's a rough game, and if you haven't played it, you don't have the right to an opinion, which I don't feel is at all accurate. It feels weird, because then you can't have an opinion on anything you haven't already done. I haven't been to space, but I can still have an opinion about NASA and space exploration. So, anyways, I know that's ridiculous, but I thought, why not go ridiculous? But I'd be interested to know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always, as to how this could be less of a talking point. It'll never go away, ever. And again, maybe this summer I can talk about some of the more violent acts in hockey history, not necessarily NHL. Things that took place as far back as over 100 years ago. May not get a lot of views. It won't get a lot of views. But it'd be fun to put those videos together. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.